Hello everyone, so exciting to be here today at this beautiful venue, and I'm so excited to be joined by Emily, Mayssa, and Anu. And before we dive into this very lofty topic of who is the modern consumer, why don't we do just a quick little self-intro?
Yes. Oh, wow, I'm the lucky one. Hi, I'm Emily. I'm the founder of Pop-Up GROCER, which is, was once a traveling grocery store that has now found its footing here in New York, in Greenwich Village with a permanent location. But we feature the newest brands to market and those that are better for you exclusively, including one right next to me. Great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Hi everyone, I'm Mayssa. I'm the founder at Behave Candy. We make low sugar, better for you candy. Our current products are all gummies, and we are in the pop-up grocery space. So we are trying to address a health concern and kind of a lifestyle upgrade in the candy category.
Hi, I'm Anu. I'm a trend forecaster and cultural strategist. My focus is generally the fashion and beauty spaces. I've worked with brands like, in both an in-house and consultancy capacity for brands like Estee Lauder, L'Oreal, Adidas, and Nordstrom.
Cool, thanks guys. So when we pose the question of who is the modern consumer, really the question is, what does the modern consumer want, right? Because I can sit here and talk about everything that's in my Essence shopping cart for the next 4 hours, but we are all the modern consumer. So when we ask that question, we're trying to figure out what is it that we want. And the reason why that's relevant now is because 3 years ago, this awful disruptive thing happened to all of us. And now that it's in the rearview mirror, we have a chance to evaluate how it changed us. So my first question for all three of you is, what are the 2 or 3 largest consumer behavior shifts that you guys have observed in the past 3 years?
I'm regretting sitting here because I hope it doesn't mean I go first each time. No, I mean, it's wild that happened 3 years ago. But I think one of the biggest shifts would be, I can speak to groceries specifically, right? Like obviously there was this big hockey stick moment with people buying groceries online. Online grocery sales had been very slow comparatively to pick up, and then it became a necessity. So people adopted that behavior, and it became quite repetitive and easy for them. And now it's steadied. There's just pretty consistent rate of growth, maybe even a slight decline year over year, but it's more or less flat. And that is exciting to me because I'm not online, but also because I think it's validated our thesis from the beginning, which is that what consumers want is convenience in the form of online shopping, to buy their regular pantry staples, their toilet paper, their peanut butter, those things that they know, that they love, those things that they trust. But what they want to complement that with is more of an experience. And I think generally speaking, I know personally as a modern consumer myself, I'm really sick of being online. And the moments that I get to be off, the moments that feel higher impact, more meaningful, more tactile, with more human engagement are really valuable to me. So I get that that's a convenient theory for me and for my business, but I genuinely mean that, and we see that is that people are really valuing and seeking out experiences, and specifically in the form of retail, and yeah.
Absolutely. Mayssa?
Yeah, I think you make such a good point, which is that everyone is the modern consumer, right? I think we love to get into so much jargon and create all these customer cohorts and segments and so much data, but at the end of the day, I think the best way to approach understanding the modern consumer is just to look at yourself and look at the people around you. That's ultimately how I think I can definitely say I landed on the business that I launched, and how we try to understand our consumer is I looked at a problem that I was having in my experience of being addicted to sugar and addicted to candy, and then looking around and not finding a product. And of course, as our business grows, we do need to lean more heavily into data. And of course, the data is showing that the modern consumer is eating less sugar, they're feeding less sugar to their kids, they're paying much more attention to what's on their ingredient list. Consumers are getting much more educated about what a nutrition panel truly means. But ultimately, we try to always come back and really simplify and just say, like, is this something I would eat? Is this an ingredient list that I would feed to my kids? If the answer is no, we won't move forward with that product. We won't move forward with that decision. And that's something that we've really, I think, just pulled through our entire business, and that has helped us maybe keep it simple and in trying to answer this very, very complicated question that we could literally like write a PhD dissertation on.
Thank you, Mayssa. Anu?
Yeah, I think that the experience of like isolation during the pandemic kind of allowed for like two things to happen simultaneously, where like one being people having the opportunity to just be a lot more introspective and kind of question what they were buying, question the decisions they were making, rethink all the stuff that they have in their house, in their apartment, and kind of reprioritize, really reconnect with their own sense of individuality, their own personality, what they actually want. And then at the same time, the sense of isolation kind of driving this urgency for community and belonging, which I think we'll get to later. But I think the intersection of those two things has led to kind of this rise of niche culture, or like the desire to kind of find belonging in these like niche spaces of interest that help you reconnect with you as a person as well.
The fragmentation of trends. I mean, that's, your job is so cool, and you just being able to analyze the trends and TikTok.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna add, I think that's such a good point about niching down, because I know for us, like, we make low sugar candy, right? Everyone eats candy, so it's so easy for us to be like, let's approach the Gen Z candy eater, or let's approach the millennial candy eater. But what we've learned now after a couple years of business is like, we actually want to, our number one customer is the diabetic, and we need to serve the diabetic first, and then everyone else comes later. And I think that's like another thing of just answering this question of who's the modern consumer, is it can be so easy to try to serve everyone, and your investors want you to talk to everyone, and your investors want a massive $1 trillion TAM, and you have to like think in that larger vision for down the road. But like niching down in the beginning, I actually think is kind of a winning strategy that we've maybe had to learn that lesson a little bit the hard way.
Yeah, I definitely want to go back to this idea of e-commerce saturation, and how like any product can have that like $1 trillion TAM if you manipulate the numbers. But I want to go back to what Emily was talking about a little bit, this idea of, you know, online shopping versus immediate brick and mortar shopping, because one of the most immediate trends that came out of lockdowns were the same day shipping grocery delivery, right? Like, we were all inundated on the subway, on Instagram, of these 15 minutes or less grocery delivery startups. And, you know, micro fulfillment was a huge buzzword. Dark stores, they're still around, but a lot of these grocery players have perished. You know, they're not Joker, 1520, Fridge No More, they're gone. And so I'm curious what your thoughts are, Emily and Mayssa. What is the need for speed, right? Like, where are we now versus 2020, 2021?
I mean, again, I think speaking as a consumer, for me, like, I would think I'd be the ideal target for any of those companies. I don't know. On the flip side, like, I live in New York, a city where you can get everything with speed that you could possibly desire any day of the week. So I guess also it just never really appealed to me, even amidst the pandemic. Like, there was a bodega around the corner from me that I could easily pop down and shop in. So I think my mic is cutting in and out. But Yeah, I think it was interesting, like the launch strategy for those companies, situating themselves in cities that are densely populated with high access, with lots of convenience stores, because I think that then that becomes a challenging value proposition, the speed. On how many instances do I really need something delivered within 15 minutes? It might be like, oops, I need a stick of butter for this dish that I'm making for a dinner party and people are going to be here in 30 minutes. But in order for that to drive significant business, that would have to occur time and time again for me as a repeat consumer. So,
Yeah, the proposition I think was always overblown, right? But Mayssa, do you feel like you need to offer your shoppers an ability to get the gummies right now, like immediately?
I don't, and I think that if that was the reality, that we wouldn't have built a good business. And I think that's what like a bubble market cultivates, is this idea that we need everything right now. It's like this fake manufactured anxiety, right? Maybe that's just capitalism as a whole, topic for another political discussion. But you know, I think ultimately I think there was like a lot of anxiety that was bred maybe also from being at home in the pandemic, and then there was this kind of bubble economically and in the investment sector that led to the kind of emerging of all these businesses. But at the end of the day, if someone needs to make a decision, purchase and receive our product in 15 minutes or we're gonna lose them, then we haven't done our job. And I say this as a candy manufacturer, we are the #1 impulse purchase. So actually, we were the #1 selling product on a number of these fast delivery services. We were making a lot of money through these platforms because people were sitting at home and, you know, wanted to buy candy immediately, but it was not a sustainable business model. We could see even all the time that we were working with them that there's no way you can make money on this unless you are, you know, gypping the delivery person or just can raise money until infinity. So we never really relied on this as like a sustainable channel that we could grow in, right? Target, Walmart, natural grocery, Amazon, these are sustainable channels that we want to focus our attention on, and ultimately just building community and people that can wait a couple days to get the candy because they just want it and need it that badly.
Yeah, and in New York, maybe the bodegas too, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I want to talk a little bit about cost, because inflation has been top of mind for 2 years now. But the thing is, people are still spending money. Like, I've been reading a lot recently about luxury and how luxury is still so in demand. There's this article that cited, I don't know how true this is, but low-income shoppers make up 27% of the luxury shopping demographic, which I was really floored by that. Anu, you know, as a trend forecaster, how does price elasticity, I guess, play into your analysis?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. And to me, what's the most fascinating aspect of this is kind of the polarization of price that we're seeing. For instance, like a low-income shopper, like it's Shein and then it's like Prada, and there's no in between anymore. We're seeing that in the marketplace. A lot of that like middle ground of brands has kind of disappeared. Those are the businesses that are failing. It's like that middle ground that used to be the bread and butter of like middle class shoppers. And instead, there's this push towards either super cheap, super fast, disposable, or super luxurious quality goods that are gonna be amazing and last forever. And there's this kind of like, let's forget the middle kind of thing. And I think it's really interesting that that's reflective of also like society, right? We're seeing the disappearance of the middle class. And so that's like reflected in those things. And I think, I think it also goes back to sustainability and kind of the polarization between that. Like those two things, it's like the most sustainable thing is to buy less,
Right.
buy more quality goods that
Right.
last longer, but not everyone can afford that. So they have to supplement with really cheap
Yeah, with fast
goods.
fashion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, I hope we can find a balance, but I think it's
Right.
going to be a while before we get there.
I have a theory that the reason why millennials are such big spenders is because we're not having kids. Childcare is too expensive, but without childcare, you know, the Prada bag, the Chanel bag, it is
Much more affordable.
Exactly. Emily, I want to talk about this emerging class of grocers and CPG startups because, you know, I think younger consumers are really comfortable with not only spending on fashion, but spending on what they eat. The Erewhon phenomenon is just insane to me. What do you think is driving that demand? Like, what is in the zeitgeist that is driving $30 smoothies and $50 probiotics?
Yeah, I am not on TikTok, but I will admit that I have an open tab just to look at the Erewhon TikToks because, I mean, obviously it's research, but I just find them fascinating and very entertaining. I mean, obviously there's still certain like demographic, there's still a certain shopper that just very simply can afford, even in a one-time situation, to shop there or to buy a $30 smoothie, even to give it a try. But I think what's really interesting is that, and I've been talking about this a lot lately, is that it seems that the outrageousness of the price is the conversation. Like, look at this ludicrously expensive haul that I got. I tried the $30 smoothie, is it worth it? But it's the statement just of being able to say that you could get it, I think, that people are interested in promoting on social media as some sort of like promotion of their abilities, status, identity, values even. So, you know, that's just like, that's just the influence of social media on society, and I think, you know, luxury goods that we're talking about. I mean, I also read an article that Gen Z is living at home now, and I read the first part of that, and I was like, that, you know, to save money, and I was like, oh, that's great. Like, of course, these kids are like, they care about the right things, you know, so they're saving up to buy a house, but actually they're saving up to buy a Prada bag. So I don't think anyone in here is Gen Z, but just as a PSA, like, please save to buy a house. And create generational wealth for you and your family. But yeah, I think, you know, as far as what we're seeing in pop-up grocer, I mean, it's a little bit of like a lipstick effect. Like, I think, you know, people who perhaps can't afford, nor would we necessarily suggest that they shop in our stores regularly every week, are willing to come in and buy an item or two because it excites them, and that's more accessible food luxury, if you will, than like a night out for $150 or $200, whatever it is now in New York, meal, or, you know, a full haul at Erewhon.
Yeah, I mean, no judgment on the Prada bag thing, right? Because the problem is the cost of childcare, the cost of housing, the cost of education, and I think those factors play a huge role in who the modern consumer is. I want to talk about blanding. Do you guys know what blanding is? Basically, it's a concept that was coined in the late 2010s to describe how pretty much every direct-to-consumer e-commerce brand had the same design signifiers. So sans serif fonts, really minimalist design, Red Antler, they all went to the same graphic design agency. And there's been a lot of chatter recently that blanding is over. Do you guys think that ubiquitous millennial Gen Z friendly design, that era is over, or do you guys think that we've actually entered the maximalist era of blanding?
I think at the end of the day, like everything always, you know, everything always like moves to the middle of the bell curve. So at one point it was blanding, but now everything is moving to the middle of the maximalist Gen Z trend, right? And I will say when we were creating our brand about 4 years ago, we went, you know, not with Red Antler, with like the cool Brooklyn, you know, shop that now has done half the brands that's at Pop-Up Grocer, and they're incredible, and Pop-Up Grocer's brand, and Gander, shout out Gander, they're the best, but, you know, everyone went to them and was like, make me not look like the millennial blanding brands, and, you know, so now the shift is just moving in that direction, and I think it's something to not, you know, it's just the way that branding evolves over time, and it's just, I think, a function of like human nature and how design happens and how creativity sort of, no one's ever had a creative thought, right? It's all like the amalgamation of everything that we're consuming and the zeitgeist and all these things. I think what we're seeing now is obviously much more fun, and our brand, I think, is kind of trying to lean into that type of maximalist, you know, middle finger to the man type messaging and brand identity. But yeah, I think the millennial pink, you know, that OG, like, it's not to shit on Red Antler, obviously their design has evolved, but like that OG Red Antler design is probably shifting out in a lot of ways, and there's something new that's emerging.
Yeah, I think that it's really fascinating, the millennial pink thing. Like, that was so strong, it lasted basically a decade, right? And I feel like I've seen over the past few years a lot of articles and people trying to make like Gen Z yellow happen or like Gen Z green, and it's like not happening, right? It's not sticking. And I think that's the shift that we're seeing in what consumers want, and this desire for individuality, the desire for uniqueness, the desire for personality that's been rising, and this rejection of sameness. So there's like, Gen Z yellow is never gonna happen, because as soon as it gains that momentum, it's uncool. So it's more about finding your brand voice, your personality, and speaking to that. And that's kind of the era we're in right now. How long it'll last, debatable. Like, we're already seeing the quiet luxury thing, like the return to minimalism. I think those two things are gonna end up living simultaneously depending on the demographic.
That's such a good point. Oh, sorry, I was just gonna say, because I think also like the way that we were raised as millennials was with so much social construct around us, like you're gay or you're straight or you're black or you're white, and like I think Gen Z, there is like this evolution away from that. So with the brands that we kind of were coming up with in the 2010s, it's like pride, like we're pro pride, we're pro Black History Month, and now Gen Z almost like rolls their eyes at that. They're like, first off, I see through it. Second off, like, I'm not even gay, I'm just nothing, like, why are you even talking about this? I'm just me. And so I think there's also like this cultural shift in how Gen Z just like experience their identity, that it's almost hard to just like latch your brand onto it in the way that I think millennials are like, yes, I identify with this group, so you can speak to me in this way and I will relate to your brand. I think with Gen Z, it's almost like, that's why now I think like TikTok is the space to grow, and you know, UGC content is what's like really performing well, because people just want to hear from one person speaking about their experience, not like these massive generalizations.
I actually think that's the crux of the whole modern consumer shift to me. It's if you think about like, I don't know how old everyone is, but like me growing up at least, like Abercrombie and Fitch, or like a brand that you were wearing or that you were buying was a signal of you were preppy or you were emo, or like there was a whole identity around it, and you had to buy that brand to be part of that, and that like doesn't exist anymore. That's not the point. If you look at like TikTok, all these trends, all like cottagecore, like indie sleaze, whatever, like they're all kind of happening at the same time. I actually really hate that they're called trends, because they're kind of more just like these coexisting aesthetics and cultures to play with. And that's how people are approaching style, products, food. Is just like playing with, exploring, experimenting, and finding what is the mix of everything that is their own personal mix.
Yeah, that's such a good point. I think on the financial side of it, could there be $1 billion fashion brand? Like a Tommy Hilfiger, Ralph Lauren? Personally, as a fashion reporter, I think the answer is no, because of all the saturation. Emily, were you gonna make a point on this idea of?
No, I was probably just gonna say that it's tiring to be alive and in business with the pendulum swinging. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's go back to virtue signaling. I hope it's okay that I use that term, but obviously in 2020 we had this huge reckoning on the heels of the racial justice movement, and a ton of companies were implicated, right? Everlane, Reformation, Condé Nast. I remember the day that Allison Roman got kind of canceled and I don't know, and I was like texting my friends, I was like, oh my God, what is going on? And obviously, you know, that was a little bit extra, but 2020 was the year that the girl boss died, right? 2020 was the year that the black square was no longer enough. How can corporations, brands, you know, they're all corporations, how can they convey a sense of value, convey a sense of community without appearing inauthentic? You know, how can they put their money where their mouth is? Everyone, jump in.
I need therapy before I can answer this question. I don't know. I have a lot of issues with the death of the girl boss, so that's for another day. But I do think that the point around trying to connect inauthentically is a really important one. And I think that at this point, and where the evolution of social media has brought us to, is that everything is the consumer is smarter than the brand now, right? The brand used to think that they were smarter than the consumer, and in a lot of ways they had access to all the information and resources, and they could kind of play like a magic trick on the consumer and subvert them and, you know, manipulate them through advertising. And I think, you know, and we were only getting our information through like TV commercials and magazine ads and the newspaper, and otherwise we were just kind of left to believe what was put in front of us. Obviously all of that has changed, and I think now the consumer is smarter than the brand. And as a brand, it's very important that we recognize and we understand that, and we are taking that into account in our strategy, and not just the outward facing strategy, also like how are we actually behaving as a business? Because I think that's the biggest thing. There was always this massive dichotomy between what a brand was putting out to the outside world and what the inside soul of the company looked like. And now with you know, employees coming out, speaking out about what was really happening behind the scenes, that has created this world where you can't really wear a mask and be a really shitty like corporate, you know, monster, because it's going to come out eventually. So how do you just like narrow or eliminate that gap and just actually stand behind the things that you're talking about, and then maybe don't even talk about them, or maybe have someone else talk about them where you didn't even ask them to, but you're actually just doing, like Patagonia is a great example, right? It's like they never come out and like do a big press release, but they just are super ethical in everything they do. And then it's like some employee will like come out and be like, did you know that our CEO like does all these 10 things, and we're all, and I don't know, we feel like we don't even, they're just not shouting it from the rooftops because they actually are living it. But yeah.
Yeah, I think the issue with a lot of these brands that were called out or canceled was that they were still performing in that way of pretending that they exist in this old world where like whatever they market is the truth, and consumers aren't going to know what's behind the scenes. But that shift happened already, and so when it came out on social media, like people speaking out, people revealing what was behind the curtain, then they didn't have an answer because they had been just fronting the whole time. And I think that it's so hard for brands, it seems like, but just like being honest. It's like, I've seen it more with sustainability. There's this brand, Gani, fashion brand. They have this account like Gani Lab, and I love the way they approach it, where they're just like, this is why we can't make this more sustainably. Or like, you like silk dresses. These are the 5 different options we have for sourcing silk. This is why we picked this one, but it's not perfect. These are the trade-offs we have to make. Or brands that came out in 2020, the ones that kind of did the best job were ones that were like, yeah, look, like we don't have any Black employees on our C-suite, and we're gonna try to change that. Like just admitting that they aren't there yet, admitting that they're wrong instead of trying to like pretend.
Yeah, like rushing to hire one
Yeah.
token person,
Yeah, it's
and
like,
everyone's like, we know what you're doing,
Yeah.
like.
I think
What?
like consumers are smarter than brands right now. We're speaking to a generation of consumers that have had access to information since like the age of 5 and can find out anything they want at any time. So there's no point in trying to pretend.
Yeah, I don't know, I guess as a consumer, I feel like it's a bit frustrating to feel as if none of those companies really suffered any consequences at the end of the day. And then I also understand that it's nuanced and that, like, yes, everybody's trying and it just takes time. Ultimately, consumers can't really put their money where their values are yet, too. You know, that's the issue with Gen Z. Like, they care about sustainability and they care about climate change and they care about independent businesses and they care about minority-owned businesses. But like, those startups their products cost more money and they're available in more limited locations that have to be sought after, and so at the end of the day, like, they just really can't spend their money with them. So maybe that's part of the problem, is that, like, you know, ultimately we still have to support these businesses for the things that we want, even though they're not doing things the right way, but that's incredibly frustrating.
Maybe brands are just brands. No offense.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's so fascinating. Mayssa, I do want to hear at some point your nuanced thoughts about the girl boss for another day. We're just up on time, but I thought a really fun little rapid fire ender would be, what brands do you guys really admire that's doing the right product, marketing, the whole shebang, and not allowed to say Patagonia again?
I can think of one in my store, Fly by Jing. You know, they make an incredible product. The founder is a really remarkable, hardworking, value-oriented individual. She's incredibly creative as well, so, you know, she's very good at delivering new products that are really compelling to her audience, merch, etc. Marketing's amazing. And has really developed like a cult following. I mean, in our pop-up in Denver, I think one of her products accounted for like a third of our sales. Yeah, I really love that brand.
I would say Ganni actually is one that always comes to mind for me. I really like how they have been approaching sustainability and fashion in general, and I think they live somewhere in the middle of that, like ultra luxury and fast fashion. They are kind of like owning that middle space. I feel like I should have a better answer. I'm blanking, but I'll say Starface also, which is probably who like the Gen Z yellow question comes from, but I really love Starface. Starface, I think, does something really well, which is they are a solution for acne, but they draw attention to your pimple. And we're kind of trying to do the same thing with candy. We are trying to reduce sugar in candy, but draw attention to actually loving candy and eating more candy. So they're definitely like a big inspiration for us. I think Starface is doing really interesting work.
Yeah, I actually agree, and I think that there's a lot of interesting brands in the beauty space generally. Topicals also, in terms of like drawing attention to imperfection in skin and kind of repositioning flaws as something to highlight or something to like think about in a different way. And also, I don't even know how to say it properly, Edem is another beauty brand that has like a really unique and fascinating take to me, the way that they story tell around their products. So it's focused on people of color and skin solutions for people of color. Their first product was like a vitamin C serum, but they do a really beautiful job of telling stories, really highlighting like heritage, cultural heritage and history around beauty practices, and kind of the things that people go through when living in like a world that doesn't really prioritize people of color and as beautiful.
Cool, I'll have to check them out. I think we have time for a few questions from the audience, if anyone would like to ask a question. Oh, okay. Here. Okay. Take this one.
access to shelf space? Thank you.
Yeah, I think that there are some retailers who are standing behind it, again, kind of like living the value that they're trying to market. I think there's a lot of retailers who came out in the summer of 2020, made all these pledges, and then did not, hired a C-suite, and all those people have left because it's like, I'm not gonna work here, like this is crazy. But I do know that like Target still has a good program. I've heard, we're not in Target yet, but I've heard that like they do actually stand behind bringing minority and female-owned businesses onto shelves. But what I would say is, because we think about this too, we're female, minority-owned, and so at the end of the day, like everything will come back to the numbers, right? The reason that topicals is getting the attention that they're getting at Sephora is because they're selling better than anything else in the category, not because they're Black owned. And I think then it just becomes an added bonus that Olamide is this incredible founder, and it is helping promote a Black owned business and a female owned business. I think ultimately though, I think what is ultimately going to propel female and minority owned businesses forward is being a best in class, and I know that's so much easier said than done, but ultimately if you have the best product, you said doctor, I'm assuming you have created something incredible for your community, having the best possible product will always speak for itself and will always drive those results, and that's something that we've had to think about too, because we get pulled into a lot of like, join this female founder incubator or have this meeting with this retailer, and guess what, most of them go nowhere, and I would have been better spent that time and energy just perfecting our product, focusing on our community, building up people who love us, who are then going to walk into Target and be like, why don't you have Behave on the shelf? So I actually have I don't know, I'm too political, but like I have a take on this, which is a lot of this stuff actually ends up draining minority founders, and it ends up wasting a lot of our time. I have so many investors who like email me and they want to take meetings with us because we have this diverse team, and they are not ready to cut checks. They're not ready to actually put us on the shelf. So it's just been a waste of time at the end of the day, and white men are not having to deal with all these side quests. So I would say focus on the business. Those retailers that really are standing behind those values will show up, but ultimately, building the best product and the best business possible, it will be first and foremost. And hopefully, the data is showing that the female-run brands and a lot of minority-owned brands are performing better. You guys are serving a community that these white-run businesses just don't know how to serve. So, sorry, not white-run, but to serve a Black community or a Hispanic community or whatever community that they're trying to speak to. So just focus on community and product, and everything else follows.
I think what I find frustrating about that a little bit though is that as we all know, the access to resources to develop a beautiful brand, to develop an excellent product, to even know the people who can instruct you to do those things are not available for people of color in the way that they are available to people like me. And as a retailer, that's incredibly frustrating, because then that means that even if I make a commitment to 20% representation on my shelves, ultimately when I look at the products, they just aren't there. So that has to change, obviously.
I think that both of you make great points, and I think that part of it is that there's both. There's retailers that have stood by their promises and retailers that have totally faded and kind of swept it on the rug, pretend like they didn't do that stuff in 2020. I think that the benefit is that you can now see that. You now can see who stuck by their promises and who didn't. And you can ask those questions because you're like, well, you said this, are you doing this? So that's kind of opened up the doors in a way that we didn't know before, we didn't have before, and we can see which retailers, which brands are actually standing by their promises, are actually making efforts and actually doing those things. I also think, I have faith that those are the ones that are gonna succeed, just because of the way that the consumer is changing, the way things are changing. I think you mentioned, Emily, that Gen Z doesn't really have their money right now to maybe spend towards the brands or retailers that live their values, but that's gonna change. They're getting older, they're getting more disposable income, and as that shift is happening, they're gonna be putting those dollars towards the brands they care about, towards the communities they care about. So it's just a slower shift than maybe that people tried to announce in 2020. It's happening, but more slowly, I think.
Yeah, it definitely takes time, to source the brands, and then also giving them resources to manufacture the volume that's needed to be in a Target or a Sephora. We're about out of time. Oh, one more. Yeah. One more. Okay. You can pick. Okay. Oh, here. Is there one of those or?
Thank you, ladies. You ladies did an amazing job. Hi, Mayssa. So good to see you. I remember like when you started your business, you sent me your candies and so yummy and so like this. And hi, everybody. So my name is Lingala. I'm a serial entrepreneur. I have a street business, and last month I just launched my third business. So my previous two still exist. For the second one, we did fundraising. We went to the venture house and we made the forces. And then I built myself to get into retail, so I'm very new in retail. And my question is about fundraising. So I actually got super lucky and very grateful before I launched the third business, which is a luxury handmade nails. So lucky to say, so we're really slow and damage free, and everything is 100% handmade. So we're revolutionized the nail industry. So before I launched the brand, investors actually told me yes, they want to invest. But I was the one who decided not to take money before last month. But after our brand launch, since it was very slow in the beginning, so those 2 weeks started getting picked up and I had very good traction through TikTok. But still, it's not as fast as I expected. So right now, like literally last month, I was like, oh my god, I need to go to investor and tell them, please give me money. So my question is, also, again, my closest friend are all in retail, and some said, yes, we make 20 million per year, and we're privately held. We don't need to every investment. And other friends said, no, you need to raise because you can go on faster, you can take off faster. So my question is like, should I take investment for now? I'm constantly debating with myself every day, and I know Mayssa mentioned investors a lot, so I'm pretty sure you have experience with fundraising and going to take money. And other ladies, please feel free to share insight. That would be super helpful. I really appreciate you ladies. Thank you.
Mayssa, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, sure. I think, and thanks for sharing, Summer, and congrats on launching your new business. My take on this is that you need capital to build a business. I think that like, there's so much messaging, I think, especially to like women and minorities, that's like, oh, just like take your $5 and build your business. Like, no, that's not the reality of this system. And there are people who do it. Like I mean, talk about women and minorities are super women and men because like they do it too. But it's just going to be like pulling teeth from day one to the end. But I think the flip side of that coin is that there's also a lot, not anymore, but it's been a lot of years with a lot of capital out there, and it can also be a curse to take in too much capital too quickly. Dilution aside, obviously you don't want to sell like half your business and then find yourself owning 5% and with like 500 investors and they're all giving you a headache. But I think, so forget the dilution piece, it's more that as soon as you have capital, it makes it very easy to make very expensive mistakes. And I think we really are in this system right now, in the startup ecosystem and the business ecosystem of like the $1 billion founder, right? And you raise this type of VC money and then 5 years later you have a $1 billion exit. That is just not the reality for most businesses. For most businesses, you need a couple of years to even understand your customer, to even understand your product, to build a supply chain that can actually sustain your business when Target does come knock on your door or when Walmart does come knock on your door. What happens when someone gives you $5 million before you've done that work is that then Walmart knocks on your door, you say yes, you go burn your $5 million and no one knows what the hell your product is, no one's going into Walmart to buy you, your supply chain is a nightmare, so you are missing orders, you get pulled from Walmart. Sorry, not to make it like this, you know, doom story, but I just think this is what happens so often when people go capital first before product. And some people have a perfect product from day one, so this is not gonna apply to everyone, but I think first and foremost, learn your market, learn your product, perfect your supply chain, then go for capital. And it may take you 3, 4, 5 years to do that. If I learned anything, and I would label myself as someone who took a little too much capital too early, if I learned anything, it's that I would have rather moved a little bit more slowly in those first few years to be able to move more quickly now, whereas now we've actually had to kind of slow down and correct some of the mistakes that we made so that we can move more quickly now moving forward.
Well, thank you for that question, Summer. And that's it on time. Thank you so much for your time, everybody. Emily, Mayssa, thank you for being with me. This is really fun.
Thanks. Thank you, Christine.